We are back with another episode of the At Heart Branding Podcast, and I'm really excited about the next few episodes. You know, the last few, we've been talking about the three major pillars of an effective brand: the brand spirit, the brand personality, and your brand story. And now we're going to be taking all of those three pillars and putting them into action by implementing your brand throughout all of your marketing assets. That includes your website, your graphic design, your logos, your colors, your social media and your content. Everything that your brand puts out needs to follow the brand clarity framework, which is those three major pillars. And so we're going to start talking with some of our top implementation partners, some of the top knowledgeable industry professionals in their fields about how to implement your brand properly throughout your marketing assets. So the first guest that we're going to have talking about implementation of your brand is Cody McLean. Now, Cody McLean, he is a great graphic designer. And I mean, so great that I had him do the At Heart brand aesthetic. So he created our logo. He came up with the color palette. He came up with the typeface. I mean, he's practically the reason At Heart looks the way it does. And I am so thrilled with the job that he's done. He's worked also with some amazing brands, including like Car2Go. And he's got a really great wealth of knowledge as it comes to what it takes to implement your brand properly throughout every part of your marketing. Really, if you think of your logo, it's a pretty important part of your brand identity. So we're going to talk with Cody about that. And here's a little bit more about Cody McLean. So Cody is a self-taught designer and learning entrepreneur and desires to be an expert of all things brand. He worked in a design agency in the design industry and currently runs his own agency called Hill & Foster, working with startup companies and medium-sized businesses to help them refocus their design, their company's visual identities. So he is the perfect person to talk about brand implementation when it comes to your brand aesthetic, your logo, colors, typefaces, and we dig into all of that when we talk with Cody in this interview. So without further ado, I will stop blabbering, and here is our interview with Cody McLean. Cody McLean, thank you so much for being on the At Heart Branding Podcast. So glad that you could join us.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So, we've done a decent amount of work together now, and I know a lot about your story. But why don't you enlighten our listeners about your journey in branding and graphic design?
Yeah, so I love design, so I've been working in the industry for a couple of years, and then recently, a couple of years ago, I quit doing that to start my own agency. So I've been doing that. What we really focus on is strategy-driven design. So design that has a purpose behind it, not just something that looks nice, but something that really has a meaning and drives results.
That's awesome. Well, on that note, you obviously did the wonderful At Heart brand, and also we've done a decent amount of client work together as well. So I was curious, kind of how you find the At Heart clarity framework impacts your design process.
Yeah, I think it's really important, and a lot of clients miss this that come to me, and they just want something that again looks nice, their personal preferences. But when you don't really dive into what you are as a company and what you stand for and who your customers actually are, you just don't have a foundation to build your visual identity off of. And I think without having that foundation, you can't really build something that means anything.
Right.
It's not very, very tangible.
Right. And what is, what are some of those things that you feel like some of those clients or people that would come to you are really missing, like some of those really important pieces when they're wanting to, design a logo or something for?
Yeah, I think they don't understand that branding is not just how something looks, but it's so much deeper. Right. It's how people feel about it, right? And a lot of it's subconscious. And if you don't know exactly who you're talking to and who your customers actually are, then you're not going to be able to really get into anything deeper besides just something that looks good, right? It might not connect, and then you're losing the whole point.
Right. And I went through this myself early on when I was kind of doing my own thing in music and stuff, just trying to find my own logo. And, you hear of all these services like 99 Designs or Fiverr, what are some of the other ones like Upwork, right? Where do you see some of the shortfalls in some of those services? And kind of what are your thoughts on a client going there first when it comes to trying to get their logo done?
Yeah, totally. That's a good question. I don't see it as a whole lot. I see it with early stage startups, and I think sometimes it's fine. Like if you're like a B2B mom and pop shop that's not looking to scale anything really huge, maybe it's fine for you, right? If you're like a startup that's working on their MVP still, maybe that's fine. But if you're any medium sized business that's looking to like do something that's actually larger than just something very small, then you're going to want to dive into how you can do something a little better. Like the shortfalls I see with 99 Designs and Fiverr and all that are like you're not going to have consistency in anything, right? You're going to get a logo made. It's not going to have any like meaningful aspect to it at all. And it might look nice, but when you go to get your website done, it's going to look different. Typography is probably going to look different. Everything is going to be mix and match sort of thing, and that's not how you build what a brand really stands for, because a brand is consistency, and when you have consistency, it allows you to like see a little aspect of something, whether it's a social media post or a website or a business card, and put it all together into one brand. If it all looks different, you're not going to connect those pieces, and you're not going to be able to build that brand reputation, which matters so much nowadays.
Right. And I love that you touched on consistency, which is what I preach with clients all the time, is that the number one rule in branding is consistency. And I think a lot of people think that consistency is just making sure that your logo is there, but you also talked about typefaces and typography, right? And colors, and making sure that the actual color is consistent, whether it's the hex code or the RBG code, right?
Sorry to budge in here, but like it's so much stuff that people don't think about, like the spacing between the logo and the text,
right? That
matters, right? And like when you go to somewhere like Fiverr, that stuff's different, and you might not notice it, and your clients might not notice, but subconsciously it matters. Like people might not necessarily be able to point out what's wrong, but you can just tell something's wrong. And that's where something like 99 Designs or these services don't really match up. And again, they're fine if you're not trying to do something really big, but there's so much competition nowadays that if you don't do something that's really amazingly visually and stands out, you're not going to be able to like get past all the competition, because nowadays there's so many entrepreneurs and so many startups that are just like trying to do the same thing you are, right? And not only are you fighting the big corporations like Coca-Cola, Nike, all these guys, but you're fighting all of the other 10 startups that are doing the exact same thing you are. And if you can't stand out between those people, you're gonna fail.
Right. And on that note, like I'm curious what your thoughts are on about how do you differentiate yourself from some of those competitors when it comes to design, right? I think there's, like you said, there's so many competitors in all of these spaces because business to a large extent has been so democratized with the internet, and you can start up a store on Shopify and drop ship everything right away. But the big differentiating factor for a lot of these businesses that succeed is the brand. And I'm curious kind of what your thoughts are on strategies for these small solopreneurs or entrepreneurs or startups to differentiate themselves from some of the competition.
Yeah, it was crazy. There was a study done by a company that said 61% of Coca-Cola's success was due to their brand. They sell sugar water, right? Absolutely. It's crazy. So I think, some strategies to differentiate yourself would be picking the right agency. I think that's important. If you're going to work with someone, pick someone who knows what they're talking about. And a lot of people go wrong here where they might not pick 99 Designs or Fiverr or something, but they pick someone who doesn't really do anything that's strategy led. Right. I think what you do is really important because, again, it has that foundation. If you don't have that foundation, you can't really build something of meaning or differentiating. Like there's a lot of companies that look good but don't have any foundation behind it, right? And that's not going to do anything. Like branding is so much deeper than just how it looks. It's, as you know, right? Like the messaging, the brand experience, all this stuff goes into play. And so like, as far as little strategies, I'd say like, make sure that your website is obviously mobile responsive, but has like simple messaging that people understand. And like, I would say like a big thing that I'm seeing nowadays is people just have so much text on their website. This is not only a visual design problem, but just a company problem. That's big. I would say making sure everything's visible, making sure imagery isn't like stock imagery. Like you don't want to use stuff that's like just you see it everywhere. That's not going to help your brand. Just little strategies like that.
Right. Totally. So if any of our listeners are kind of in a position where they feel like, you know, they're either needing to do a rebrand, so, you know, they've been around for a little while and they've got a brand that's a little bit stale, or they're a new startup and they need to start from scratch and actually start building a brand, kind of what is that process that you would recommend them go through?
Yeah. I would say this is an interesting one. I would say find someone who knows design. Whether that be a friend or a family member, find someone who knows design and get them to counsel you on picking an agency. Because a lot of people, if they're business owners, they might not know good design, and so they'll pick an agency based on you know, how friendly they are,
right,
or where they're ranked on SEO. And sometimes that is a good indicator, but a lot of times there's a big issue right now with agencies that aren't doing quality work. And the entire agency is filled with just salespeople and marketing managers, or project managers, and they don't actually, maybe they outsource their design to something like Fiverr or 99 Design. So you're getting this thing that you think is an agency, but it's really not. So counsel someone on good design, look at their portfolio, make sure they have a diverse portfolio. And a good like thing I like to do is like look at their portfolio, and if you'd want your brand to look like what they've done before, then go with them. But if you don't think that their work is what you'd want to be proudly selling, or what you'd want your company to look like, you know, maybe that's not the company for you. And I'd say keep searching. Like there's no shortage of agencies out there. I wouldn't just pick the first one. I'd sit down with a bunch. Another thing I'd do is outline your budget, like upfront. Because a lot of times, you know, design can range so much, you know, like you could get a logo for, you know, $5 for Fiverr, or you could spend $50,000 to get an identity system built.
Right.
It really depends. And so I would outline your budget up front, and stick by that, because there'll be an agency for you in that price range. You know, will it be the best agency? Maybe not, but it might be. So yeah, I would really try to outline your budget.
Right. And within that process, like I find it interesting, you know, when we were going through the At Heart brand, leveraging inspiration from other sources and other companies. I always find that a really interesting process, because you're not necessarily wanting to copy somebody exactly, but having an idea of the direction and the aesthetic and the feeling that you want somebody to feel when they look at a logo, or they you know, see a color. How does that play into that process for a potential client, right? When they're looking for
totally.
brand themselves.
The agency should be doing this for you. If you get any, you know, decent agency, they're going to go through what's called a discovery session, which allows you to discover inspiration, different designs. But this is after you've already done something like the ACCAR Clarity Framework that allows you to figure out who your customers are. And from there, you'll be able to actually find good reference. I think if you find reference that's in line with who your competitors are, sometimes that's helpful, because you can do above and beyond what they do and not copy it. You know, you don't want to copy it, but you want to do something that's obviously similar if you're same target demographics as your competitors, but just figuring out what's out there is really important.
Right. And, you know, I not to go back too far to consistency, but, you know, I look at, there's some companies, a lot of them small to medium-sized businesses out there, that have gone through this work and created a great structure of a logo and a brand. But it doesn't end up getting implemented with consistency through social media,
right,
in particular, I think. For some businesses, they it seems it can be tough to create content that is also branded and also looks the same and looks consistent. Are there any tips that you would have for those small to medium sized businesses that may not necessarily have a lot of resources in the social media department when it comes to implementation? But what kind of tactics or tips would you have to implement that way?
Yeah, for sure. If you're super small, I would get some kind of in-house designer or agency to be able to make templates for you. Right. And then you can just replicate those across the applications. But if you're a medium-sized business, you're a little bit bigger. A great thing is to get an in-house designer. You can hire someone for relatively cheap that's comes in 2 days a week and just works on social media stuff. Or if you don't have that kind of budget, you can work with an agency and they work with you maybe one day a week. So I think doing something like that is really going to pay off to be able to build your especially your social media following. Any kind of ads though, any kind of marketing content that you're doing.
Yeah, because I mean, like you said, it's not just the post that you're posting every day. It's also all of your ads and making sure that, this is kind of the other side of the story part of the framework, but your copy is consistent and is telling the same story. It absolutely goes the same with the design. So, I mean, as we look at the structure of what is included in a brand design, right? I'd be interested to kind of chat through each structure and each pillar when it comes to the framework. So, sure. With the logo, the colors, typeface, all that kind of stuff. Like, I'd just be interested to kind of know what you believe the importance of consistency is around all three of those, and just speak to why they're so important to be consistent. So even if we just started with the logo, just making sure that the logo is consistent, right, and the spacing is consistent. Yeah, and, I love in the brand guide that you created for AdHeart that you're not stretching it, that you're right, like all that kind of stuff, right?
Know that stuff, right? Yeah. And so it's all really important, and I think a lot of people don't follow it and think it's important because they don't know why it's important. But the reason why it's important is because of reputation, right? Like the reason why you have to be consistent is because if not, people aren't going to recognize you. And if they don't recognize you, then you're not going to be able to build your brand, right? And your company, you're not going to be able to, your marketing is not going to be effective and consistent. So I think, making it consistent isn't just about it looking pretty every time, right? But it's about driving results, and that's what we want to do at the end of the day,
right? And then with color, like, I think color is a very interesting topic because I've had conversations multiple times with multiple clients that are like, "Oh, we're just using red because our brand color is red," and I'm like, no, your brand color is this hex code or this RBG code, and like the CMYK or whatever it is, right? That is one thing that I had to learn myself the hard way too, right? Because there is such a large spectrum. Like, Coke's red is Coke's red. Like, they don't use that. They don't use any other type of hue of red. It is that one specifically.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people get in trouble when they're trying to print stuff using Pantone colors, because what Pantone colors are is they're printable color that will print across any application. You can paint your walls that color. You can do whatever you want that color. And then there's hex code, which obviously is extremely flexible, RGB, and then CMYK for digital print. So people run into the problem there was when they just have hex code, right? A lot of Fiverr designers, they'll just give you hex code. And then you're like, well, what do I do with this when I have to print something, or when I have to, paint my business out, like my entire business this color? If you're working with anyone who's got experience, it's going to translate those colors for you and build you a brand guideline that's going to be several pages long. That's going to explain, each color and what they're used for and how much to use, and if they're an accent color or primary color and all that stuff. And I think it's important to have those guidelines. And, back again, like if you're working with an agency that won't do this properly, I've worked with countless companies that, the colors won't even be right on the brand guidelines. And it's like, that's the simplest thing, but a lot of companies can't get it right. And
I think you raised a good point though there too, because the client that we had been working with, we went through and created the the hex codes and the CMYK and RGB and all that kind of stuff. But then they're going, well, we need to implement this into signage outside of our business, and the company that they were going to create the sign that was going to be on the outside of their business was Pantone, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so it's then trying to find the closest to the hex code, which is more of a digital version of like how as a designer do you navigate that to make sure that the client finds success when they're implementing the brand.
Totally. And what I do is I build the brand guidelines like what I did for you, and right, and so that'll explain everything, and it'll have all those things. And doing that in the initial stages of a business is always the easiest, right? To establish that right up front. However, if you are a small to medium sized business who hasn't done any of this stuff, and now you're like randomly just worrying about this stuff now because you're watching this podcast or whatever, I would say maybe work with someone that knows this stuff. Try to get them to explain it to you, and there's all sorts of stuff you can do. You can go online, you can like Google hex to Pantone color converters, and that stuff's fine. Like that stuff works great, and if you want to do that, you can. But just consulting an expert is usually going to be the easiest way to do it.
Right. And then kind of the last pillar, and correct me if I'm wrong if it's the last or not, is typeface. Like I think typeface is a completely different world when it comes to consistency, because it's something that is, I think, often overlooked when it comes to a brand to a large extent, especially for small to medium-sized businesses where you're going, I'm just going to use Times New Roman or have Helvetica, right? Yeah. But the typeface that you actually use is really important in portraying who you are as a brand.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people, Helvetica and Times New Roman, those are great typefaces as well, right? But
I mean, Comic Sans.
Yeah, that's maybe not. But no, I think like just keeping it consistent and knowing like everything from the kerning, which is this letter spacing, to how big you make a header on your website. It all plays into like brand consistency, right? And there's a lot of things that most designers should be considering. And you as a business owner, should know, but if you're working with someone, you don't necessarily need to know, but everything is super important. A big thing I find is like, the sizing of your lettering will always vary. Like you'll have, this is getting real nitpicky, but like a 60-point font on an Instagram post, and then under that you'll have a 40-point font. Right. But that's not necessarily like, those don't look good together because they're not different enough. Right. And following like typeface weights, like usually that's outlined in your guidelines, which weights to use and which weights not to use.
Yeah. Which is about how bold.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So. Like, stuff like letter spacing, all this stuff. There's just so much that people don't consider, and it really makes a difference.
Right. That's the biggest thing I think that I've learned over the years too, is I think typography can really be a game changer in establishing consistency, because you look at the documents that you create, whether it be a brochure or a sales page, even for us, like the At Heart Clarity Framework uses the exact same typeface there as we do on the website, as we do on email signatures, right? Like, and it, when you're reading something, which is oftentimes when customers end up buying is after they've read something, you're driving consistency and creating awareness, at least, right, across the board. And so that's the one thing that I've always found really, really interesting, is finding a typography or a typeface that fits your brand as well, right? That kind of portrays what you're going for with the rest of the design, with the rest of the strategy. So
I find a lot of people, this is just a little note if you're like a small to medium sized business, if you're getting a sign made, usually signage companies won't use the right typography. So you got to clearly note that, right? If you have a new sign outside your building that says open now, is that going to be the right right Pantone? Is that going to be the right typography? If you're not using a graphic designer to do that, you're using a signage company, they've got to know exactly what typeface you're using,
Right.
what the kerning is, all that stuff, right?
Yeah. Well, and I know we've kind of talked about it throughout this this conversation, but can you talk also to the importance of and also what goes into an actual design brand guide for a client?
Yeah, I mean, the minimum should be so a brand overview, messaging. So the messaging of the brand, what the voice is, and then typography, colors, the identity usage, so how to actually use the identity, spacing, and then brand imagery. So what imagery looks like that the brand uses and what it doesn't look like, sort of thing. And then some other ones that it could be is like mock-ups of how to use the brand. So like different installations, applications. So how it looks on a business card, how it looks on a letterhead, all that stuff. Icon style. So is the icon style flat style or is it outline style, right? Little things like the favicon. So that's a little logo on your top of your tab.
Yeah, and the tab in your browser. Yeah,
like little things like that go into it. There's a lot that goes into it, or that should go into it. You don't necessarily need, 100 or 40-page guideline, but something that outlines those points is pretty important.
And I think this is also what I love about the guideline that you create as a designer, and how it marries up with the clarity framework as well, in the sense that we know that business relationships are a lot more fluid than they are, structured, in the sense that you're not always necessarily going to be the designer if you create the brand that is going to be implementing that brand, right? And that's something that, is built into our process. Is we want to create a framework that encourages consistency to the best of our ability, right? We want to create a messaging framework that tells the same story over and over and over again, so that is consistency and inconsistent, but also within the same voice. So that's more on the messaging side again as well, that the voice is the same, but it goes exactly the same with the brand guide, right? And making sure that you're using the same typefaces with the same weight, with the same spacing and the same colors and all that kind of stuff.
And a lot of companies that I work with aren't necessarily huge teams. Usually they're startup companies and they're just getting started. So having that guideline that really tells you how to use it, even if you need to use it, because if the company owner is a small company and they need to go in and they need to create a sign for themselves, how can they be able to do that?
Sure.
Like we're not.
I do that all the time, and I reference the brand guide, right? And it's like, obviously I throw a lot of stuff your way to go, hey, can you help me implement this document or this sign or this design work? But at the end of the day, if it's a small change, going, okay, I need to make sure that I'm using this color here.
Totally.
And finding that weight there, right?
Exactly.
So,
It's everything. So,
that's cool.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Well, thank you so much for being on the show.
Yeah,
I really appreciate it. I hope that our listeners kind of got some design hacks out there. Where can our listeners find you and find some of your work?
Yeah. So the agency I run now is called Hill and Foster, HILLANDFOSTER.com. So you can find us there. That's it's got some portfolio items there that you can check out. So yeah,
that's awesome.
Yeah, reach out if you have any questions.
Yeah.
I'd love to chat with whoever needs help with.
Cool. Well, thanks so much, Cody. Really appreciate it. And like he said, you can find him at hillandfoster.com. He's got some amazing work. And look forward to chatting next time.
Cool. Thanks for having me.
Thanks, man. And there you have it. Cody McLean sharing his expertise on graphic design and brand aesthetic through the implementation of your brand clarity framework. Now, if you want to learn more about Cody McLean and the design work that he does, you can visit hillandfoster.com. And you can also check out Cody on the At Heart Collective. If you go to www.atheart.co/collective, we have partnered with some of the industry's top implementation partners. That goes with graphic design, web development, content creation, and more. So Cody and his design agency, Hill & Foster, are our design implementation partner with At Heart Collective. So please go check out atheart.co/collective to learn a little bit more about how we help implement your brand as well as create a really clear strategy for it. So hit up atheart.co/collective to learn more. And thank you again to Cody for taking the time to share his expertise on graphic design and implementing your brand effectively.